Howdy folks, and welcome back to Mingles with Jingles, episode... I don't know, I've lost track. It's the day after Tankfest. I think I've just slept for 11 hours. I was exhausted, on my feet all day. Brand new pair of boots. Luckily, they were very, very comfortable. But, yeah, Tankfest was awesome. Absolutely awesome. And the best part about it was meeting all of you guys. I seriously, I couldn't move 15 metres before being stopped by somebody and saying, "Oh, are you Jingles? Oh, we've got to get a picture." And there must have been 150 people throughout the course of the day, or more, that I had pictures taken with. It was just, it was absolutely amazing. There was one slightly bizarre incident, actually two, that I know everybody are going to be talking about. And it was because I mentioned it on Facebook when I got back from Tankfest last night. And that was me getting thrown out of, not once, but twice, getting thrown out of the wargaming area at the Tank Museum. Now, as you know, Wargaming make World of Tanks, so and they always have a heavy presence at Tankfest. In fact, they've actually sponsored the development of the new education centre at the Tank Museum, so they put a lot of money into the Tank Museum and supporting tank events in general. Obviously, you know, they get good publicity out of it for their game, World of Tanks, that's fine. But here's the weird thing. Wargaming have quite a heavy presence at Tankfest. A whole section of one of the display floors was set up as a World of Tanks playing area, and you know they had Wargaming banners up all over the place, and it was really, really well done, very well presented. A lot of Wargaming staff there, and they had a whole bunch of very, very powerful high-spec PCs set up with test accounts with every tank available in the game. And if you were playing World of Tanks yesterday, you may have been playing alongside a bunch of people who were actually playing from the Tank Museum at Bovington. It was really, really good. Now, I am one of Wargaming's EU forum community contributors, and in the community contributor sub-forum, I posted a Tankfest thread and told them that I was going to be going to Tankfest and I was going to be wearing a German Panzer Crew uniform. And I put a picture of the uniform up, and you know, everything. That they knew I was going to be there. They knew what I was going to be wearing. You know, and it was not an SS uniform. It was a German Panzer Crew uniform. So I turned up wearing the uniform, and there's hundreds of people got their picture taken with me. It was great meeting you guys there. It was absolutely fantastic. And eventually, as I'm wandering around the museum floor, I found the wargaming area. And the second I walked in, of course, dozens of people wanted their picture taken with me, as you'd expect. And it was great. Until one of the wargaming staff approached me and asked me to not have my picture taken inside the wargaming area. And I was like, what for? He says, well, we can't have you wearing that uniform with, you know, with Wargaming's logo in the background and so on and so on. And I thought, what? But then, it occurred to me, actually, well, it's not an SS uniform, but, you know, German military Second World War uniforms did have little swastikas on them. You know, the old German eagle is clutching a swastika in its claws, so I had that on the left breast of the uniform, the right breast of the uniform, and the little German badge with the little swastika above the Bevo cap badge on the cap. And I thought, well, okay, that makes sense. You know, from a PR standpoint, the fact that, yeah, it's not an SS uniform, but there are two very small swastikas on the uniform, and they don't really want pictures of me inside the wargaming stand with these little swastikas on the uniform going up on the internet. So I thought, okay, fair enough. So what we did then was, right outside where the wargaming stand was, that's where the TOG and the M103 were. So anybody who wanted a picture taken with me, we went outside and we took the pictures in front of the TOG. Not a problem. I can understand their viewpoint. So that was the first time I got thrown out of the wargaming stand. Anyway, went about the rest of the museum, saw the show, and then a couple of my subscribers found me and said they'd organised with the wargaming staff a Tank Company game, and it was going to be some of the wargaming staff and me versus a whole bunch of of my subscribers and players and so on and so on, and could I come back and take part in the game? I said, yeah, no problem, great. So we went back to the wargaming area, and while we were waiting for the game to get set up, Another, people were asking, "Oh, it's Jingles. Can we get your picture taken?" And I said to them, "Yeah, no problem. We just can't take the picture in here." So every time somebody came up and said, "Can we get a picture of you?" I said, "Yeah, no problem." Went outside the wargaming area with my back towards the TOG again, so that wargaming's emblems and logos wouldn't be in the picture, and we had the pictures taken there, and then went back inside, and I got thrown out again. That they they'd invited me back just to throw me out again, and this time it wasn't that they didn't want the picture taken; they just didn't want me in there at all. So totally bizarre. Wargaming threw out one of their community contributors, and it was, I say Wargaming, one PR guy just decided that this was bad, and tossed me out of the Wargaming display at Bovington Tank Museum, not once but twice. So yeah, weird. Left hand doesn't know what right hand's doing. It's not like they didn't know I was going to be there and what I was going to be wearing, and they didn't say a thing about it before the event. It wasn't until I was actually in there in front of everybody that they just threw me out of the place. So that was bizarre. Anyway, on with the questions, and the first proper question of the day comes from Iron Reaver Soul 624. What do you think of Wargaming's buffs and nerfs for historical accuracy? Basically, he's saying that it just seems like Wargaming pull the old historical accuracy card out to justify random buffs and nerfs to tanks in the game, and they use historical accuracy when it suits them and when they don't. And yeah, I agree. I think that's exactly what they do, but I totally understand their reasons for doing it. You have to realise World of Tanks isn't a simulator. Wargaming have never tried to make a tank simulator. This is an arcade game with simulator aspects. And their standpoint, from my opinion, seems to be that they're going to try to make things as historically accurate as possible. But the second that negatively impacts on the gameplay, historical accuracy goes out of the window. And don't forget, I mean, if you look at, for example, if you look at the Russian self-propelled gun line, 90% of them are works of fiction. They never existed. The Russians had massive artillery forces in the Second World War, but almost none of them were self-propelled guns. Most of them were driven by tractor or horse. And so it's, you can only really take historical accuracy so far. If the game was 100% historically accurate, there would be one or two Russian artillery pieces, and that would be it. So yeah, I understand what they're doing. They want to make the game as accurate as they can, but if that's going to be at the price of gameplay and game balance, then historical accuracy can be damned. And so, yeah, there are really two cards that they pull out whenever they buff or nerf any of the vehicles in the game. One's game balance and the other one's historical accuracy. And if we're going to be 100% honest here, it's mostly for game balance. And if buffing or nerfing a tank for game balance also makes it more historically accurate, they whip out the historical accuracy card. And if it makes a tank less historically accurate, then they whip out the game balance card. And yeah, I understand it. It's to make the game more fun to play, and I don't have a problem with it. I understand why they do it. It's if they're going to use historical accuracy wherever they can, but if that shoe doesn't fit, then they have absolutely no problem with saying it's for game balance instead. But it's actually for game balance all the time, and they only whip out the historical accuracy card when it suits their purpose. And I understand, and I don't really have a problem with that. As long as it makes the game fun and fair to play, then they can call it whatever they like. So yeah, I 100% agree. I think they definitely do call it historically accurate, only when it suits them. But I don't actually have a problem with that. I think it's all necessary, because, as I said, they are not trying to market this game as a simulator. It is very much an arcade game with historical aspects to it. So I don't have a problem with that. You're absolutely right, that is definitely what they're doing, but I totally understand why they do it, and I think they're doing a pretty good job. Next question comes from Scott Murray. I've almost certainly mispronounced his name. Sorry if I have. He wants to know, basically, based on the previous Mingles with Jingles, when I showed you who Jingles actually was, my gnome warlock in World of Warcraft, he wants to know, do you think World of Warcraft is going downhill? Specifically, he's talking about the dumbing down of the game. the way it's being made easier and easier and easier. To an extent, I don't think World of Warcraft's going downhill. There are people who want things to be harder, and there are people who want things to be easier, and there are people who don't have an opinion either way. And every time Blizzard makes a certain aspect of the game easier, people accuse them of dumbing the game down and making it, easy mode. And they get, when they do the opposite, they get people complaining about, it being made too hard and not, not suitable for casual gamers. It's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't things. And I suspect what Scott is talking about is things like the raid finder system. For those of you who haven't played World of Warcraft, raids, where you get groups of 10 or 25, or back in the old days, 40 players together to take down really, really challenging boss content. They introduced a dungeon finder, sort of easy mode versions of the raids in the latest expansion, the Mists of Pandaria, for World of Warcraft. And I kind of have to agree with him on that point. And this is all as a reaction to how hard things were in the previous expansion, Cataclysm, which really was a bollock hard difficulty level. Certainly, I remember towards the end of the expansion prior to that, Wrath of the Lich King, everything was just so mind-bogglingly easy. Doing heroic dungeons, you would breeze through them in 15 minutes, and the healer would never break a sweat because the tank was just about unkillable, and the DPS were nuking everything so fast. It really was easy mode. But what a lot of people forget to take into account is that those heroic dungeons were designed for people who didn't have epic raid gear, for people who were, it had to remain challenging for people who were doing them for the first time with normal dungeon gear and maybe a couple of reputation items. And you cannot balance a dungeon at that sort of difficulty level versus people who have been playing that expansion for a year and a half and are wearing, epic gear from head to foot. So yeah, heroic dungeons were ridiculously easy towards the end of Wrath of the Lich King. Then they brought out Cataclysm, and it went completely 100% the other way, because everybody was complaining that everything was too easy in Wrath of the Lich King. So Blizzard said, yeah, okay, we'll make it slightly more challenging in Cataclysm. And then everybody started complaining that things were too hard in Cataclysm. So Mists of Pandaria came out, and they swung it back the other way again. I think they struck a pretty good balance in Mists of Pandaria, but things like the... and again, another thing that they had back in vanilla World of Warcraft, before there were any expansions, with the raid content, first of all, you needed to be reasonably well geared to do a Molten Core raid, for example. And then, in order to go from Molten Core to Blackwing Lair, you pretty much needed to have done Molten Core and had Molten Core Tier 1 raid gear. And then, to get into Naxxramas, Naxxramas was brutally hard. And you had to have farmed Molten Core to get the Molten Core gear that enabled you to do Blackwing Lair to get the Tier 2 raid gear that enabled you to even beat the trash mobs in Naxxramas. And that was a big mistake, because they'd spent millions developing Naxxramas as a raid dungeon, and only 5% of their player base had the gear to even survive the trash mobs. So, as a result of that, they've constantly been trying to make raiding more accessible to the general player base, so that the casual players could actually see everything that was in the game that they spent all this money developing. And I understood that, but I think they took it one step just a little bit too far with the whole looking for raid system, where you could use the dungeon tool to find a group for a dungeon, and they introduced raids into that as well. I didn't raid in Mists of Pandaria. I was a 25-man heroic raider all the way through, up until almost the very end of Cataclysm, when I finally got bored of World of Warcraft. And I came back as a casual player for Mists of Pandaria, and I thought, I'll just see what this raid finder system is like. So, wearing mostly shitty gear, I queued up for one of these raids, and I forget the name of the raid that we got into, but I had no idea what was going on. None whatsoever. Didn't have a clue. I deliberately did not research the boss abilities, all the sorts of things that you generally needed to do before you went into a raid. I didn't have a clue which way to go. I just followed the crowd. I didn't know what abilities the bosses were going to use on the fights. I didn't have the faintest idea. And I literally just, used my brain. And we didn't wipe once. We killed everything in about half an hour. And it was a 25-man raid group, and I was third on damage done. And it was tragic. It was absolutely tragic. And I walked out of there with, some epic gear, and I'd beaten the raid without having the faintest idea how I did it. Just basically cruising on autopilot. Far too easy. Just from one, it's like they've gone from one extreme right to the other. I dare say there are countless people out there who think that's a fantastic idea. The fact that absolutely anybody, without the slightest idea of what they're doing, can jump into a raid and beat raid bosses without realising or understanding how they did it, and they probably think that's a great idea. Personally, I think it sucks. I think you should, if you're going to get into that sort of level of content, then you should at least have the basic idea of what you're doing. So on that level, yeah, I think they have definitely dumbed it down a little too far. Next question comes from Enduring Frost, and he wants to know, have I ever been approached by any of the game developers of the games that I'm promoting here on YouTube, like War Thunder, World of Tanks, etc., and offered any sort of compensation? It's a sort of a yes and no kind of deal. With regards War Thunder and Gaijin Entertainment, no, not a thing. I don't expect them to. So the fact that Gaijin have never said, Jingles, thanks for all the free promotion here, have stuff, it's not a problem. With World of Tanks and Wargaming, it's a kind of a love-hate thing going on. There are definitely people who work for Wargaming who are very, very keen to promote the community and do things for the people who do the most for the community. But I get the distinct impression that they're fighting an uphill battle against other people at Wargaming. And I've got to give a shout out here to Ector, who, if any of you are active on the EU forums or you follow any of the live streams, you've probably heard of Ector. When he first started posting on the EU forums, it was immediately apparent that there was a new sheriff in town, because he would always listen to what you had to say. Even if what you were saying was just patently ridiculous, he would never just dismiss you and call you an idiot. He's not Serb. He always had time for everybody. His replies were always intelligent. He always took your point of view into account. It was a pleasure. It was like there was a wind of change on the forums when Ector started suddenly posting as a community moderator. Now, he's not just a community moderator, he also actually works at Paris for Wargaming as part of their community team. And Ector's doing a lot, or he's trying to do a lot for the community. I can't say that is actually what's happening. This is the impression that I get. I could be wrong. And I get this impression because every time there's a new community-led initiative from Wargaming, it's always Ector who's the one taking the lead on the forums, saying, doing the announcements. For example, he started a forum thread in the EU forums promoting, exactly what you're talking about, promoting the most prominent World of Tanks YouTubers and the most prominent World of Tanks blog websites and the most prominent World of Tank live streamers. And then shortly after that, a whole bunch of us were nominated as community contributors and given a new forum title and a new special sub-forum just for us, with the idea being that we were the ones doing the most for the World of Tanks community, so some official recognition, a few little extra forum privileges that went with it, and the promise that Wargaming were going to help us by giving us bonus codes and stuff to give away. Just helping promote us, since we were putting the work in for Wargaming. Wargaming were going to put the work in for us, and what can I say? I mean, it's almost as if there are some very, very dedicated and highly motivated people at Wargaming. And again, this is purely, this is just me guessing. I can't say for a fact whether or not this is the case, but it's as if there are some very highly motivated and dedicated people at Wargaming working their asses off, trying to come up with stuff and do stuff for the people who support the community the most. And there are another bunch of people at Wargaming who either don't give a shit or are actively going out of their way to try to sabotage their efforts. And just as a perfect example of the sort of thing I'm talking about, just look at what happened at Tankfest. I mean, it's the tank museum. It's Tankfest. I turned up in a tank uniform. I am, as of yesterday, I was World of Tanks YouTuber of the month for the month of June, and they threw me out of their own display at Tankfest. It's like the left hand at Wargaming doesn't know what the right hand is doing. There's just it's comical. It's just, they really need to start talking to each other and not trying to sabotage each other's efforts. So, I mean, I suppose the short answer to your question, have I ever received any kind of promotion or, compensation for the work that I do on YouTube? Well, I don't expect any. And I certainly haven't had anything directly from Gaijin with regards to War Thunder. And there are definitely people at Wargaming who are trying their best to help promote people like me, who do stuff for the Wargaming community, but they appear to be in the minority, and they appear to be outnumbered by people at Wargaming who either don't give a crap or are actively trying to sabotage their efforts. So, yeah, what are you going to do? It's the internet. Next question from Papa Bear 666. He wants to know, Jingles, what are your thoughts on the new World of Warships, and will you be playing it when it comes out? I am hugely excited about World of Warships, particularly because I think that Gaijin, sort it out, Jingles. Yeah, I think Wargaming's Big World game engine is very, very suitable for doing a warship game. I think it's the wrong choice of game engine for doing World of Warplanes, which is probably why World of Warplanes is, well, in my opinion, and I know a lot of you disagree, but hey, it's my opinion, it's my video. This is why I think World of Warplanes is struggling a little bit. The game engine just really isn't suitable for that kind of game. Works really well for tanks. It's more slower paced combat, which is why I think it's going to work really, really well for World of Warships, and I'm very, very excited to see what they can do with it. So I do have my fingers crossed that I'm going to get an invitation into the World of Warships closed beta, but you guys shouldn't get too excited because it's going to be under a non-disclosure agreement for a long time to come. So even if I do get into it, one, I won't be able to show you any of the gameplay until the NDA is lifted, and two, I wouldn't even be able to tell you that I was in the closed beta. So yeah, I'm very, very much looking forward to World of Warships. Very, very excited to see what they're going to do with it. But I'm not going to be able to tell you anything about it for a long time to come, even if I do get in. Next question comes from Adang623, and he wants to know, Jingles, is there a particular documentary series you would recommend to people interested in finding out about some of the lesser-known aspects of the Second World War? Yeah, definitely. And it's probably what sparked my interest in Second World War history, was back in the 1970s. There was a documentary series called The World at War. It was narrated by Sir Laurence Olivier, and it was produced by Thames Television for the ITV network, and it was absolutely bloody epic. Obviously made in the 70s, they had the benefit of being able to do interviews with a lot of World War II veterans, British, American, Russian, German, you name it. Because made in the 70s, most of them were still alive back then. You can get it on DVD, but most of the episodes, and there were a lot of them made, you could spend days watching this series. Most of them are up on YouTube. So if you just Google YouTube for The World at War, you can still watch all of them for free, as nature intended. And I can't recommend it enough. This TV series, and I used to watch it religiously every week on a Sunday night, right after The Muppet Show, to talk about extremes of entertainment. You Kermit the Frog 1 minute, and right after that, Sir Laurence Olivier and the Nazi concentration camps, and the Burma campaign and the Flying Tigers, and just there wasn't an aspect of the war that this documentary series didn't cover, and it is probably single-handedly responsible for sparking my interest in this period of history. Can't recommend it enough to you guys. If you haven't seen it, you owe yourself. Get out there and watch it. It was really, really good. A number of you, for some bizarre reason, have asked whether or not I make model kits. this question pops up time after time after time. It's usually a whole bunch of different people asking the same question. So I figured I may as well put the matter to rest and finally answer the question. Yeah, I do. I'm not a huge model enthusiast, but I have got a few. Sitting on my desk right now, I have a Mosquito fighter bomber, a TIE interceptor, a Y-wing bomber, a T-65 Income X-wing starfighter, a snow speeder, a Lambda class shuttle. Yes, I am a bit of a Star Wars nerd. Oh, I've got the Millennium Falcon here as well. That's quite a big one. And ones that I haven't made myself, but I have had made for me at great expense. There's a company called Figureprints, which will go into the World of Warcraft armory and will do models of your World of Warcraft characters. And I've got two of my mage, Callie, in her Tier 7 and Tier 8 gear, and one of my warrior, Gorn, in his Tier 8 tanking gear from World of Warcraft. Oh, speaking of Gorn, my human warrior tank, a couple of people have also asked, was the name Gorn inspired from the Gothic series of games? I've never played the Gothic series of games. Gorn was actually the name of my... Oh, this is going back. This would have been 1986, 1987, when I started playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, I am a massive nerd. Gorn was the name of my warrior. And basically every time I've played an online game, specifically MMOs, where you get the option of playing a warrior, it's always a human and he's always called Gorn. It's just a name that I always use over and over and over again. So that's two questions answered for the price of one. Yes, I do make model kits. I'm not a massive model enthusiast, but I do dabble in them. And no, Gorn was not a name inspired by the Gothic games. Sorry to disappoint you. Sean Willis wants to know, Jingles, have you ever known anybody who's tried to pass yourself off as your commanding officer while you were in the Navy in order to impress somebody? Sailors will do absolutely anything to get into a nightclub when they're on shore leave. And I've never done it myself, but there have been multiple occasions when... Because the thing is, if you're trying to get into an exclusive nightclub in somewhere, posh, the last thing you want to do is say, I'm a sailor. They'll just throw you out. We're not really known as a breed for our polite manners. It's generally speaking, the less sailors in your nightclub, the less trouble you're likely to have. However, I can remember, actually this was in Scotland. Does Scotland count as a foreign country? I suppose if the Scots had their way, it would be a foreign country. So yeah, Scotland counts. We were in Glasgow, I think. Yeah, I was on HMS Newcastle. There was an air show going on. We just finished doing a joint maritime exercise with NATO up off Cape Wrath, and with bloody awful weather. And on the way back down, we stopped in Glasgow. And I think Glasgow had just been named, if you can believe this, European City of Culture. There was an air show on, and there were a whole bunch of, I think the stars of the show, they'd managed to get a whole bunch of Soviet MiG-29s over to do some air displays. And there were a couple of Russian pilots in the queue in front of us. And ahead of them was a few other members of the ship's company, and the bouncers on the door were basically, if they were under orders not to, they knew the Navy was in town, and then they didn't want anything to do with us. So the bouncers were basically, anybody they suspected of being a sailor was just getting thrown out. So we saw a couple of the guys that we knew up in the front of the line getting turned away, and we thought, we're going to have to come up with a plan here. And then we spotted these Russian pilots. So Knocker, the guy who was with me, just said, just back me up here. I was like, what are you going to do? Just back me up. And as we got to the front of the queue, the bouncers were like, looking us over, and they were like, no, they ain't going to let us in. And Knocker said, he pointed to me and said, this guy's one of the Russian pilots, and I'm his translator. And they went, all right, okay, and you go. So, yeah, pretending to not be a sailor and pretending to be a Russian pilot actually got us into a nightclub in Glasgow. It wasn't worth the effort, it was a shit nightclub. But yeah, you're constantly having to pretend to not be a sailor in order to get into exclusive places when you travel the world, because they don't want sailors in there. It's usually asking for trouble. Final question of the day comes from Lego Dude 1456, and this is a great question. Jingles, what's the most important thing you learned during your time in the Navy? There's an old expression I like to use that covers the answer to this question, and it goes like this. Never ever be the best person around at digging ditches, because all they do is give you a bigger shovel. And what that means in practice is, by all means, be good at doing things, right? You should always, try to be the best you can be. But don't be so good that you stand out from the crowd, right? Because that's just asking for trouble. And to put that into practical terms, I'll tell you what happened when I joined my very first ship, HMS Brazen, as a radio operator. Very early on, it became apparent that I was the best person around at tuning UHF radio sets. Now, tuning the UHF sets was a real ball ache, massive pain in the arse. It took hours. It was repetitive, it was boring, and it was very, very fiddly. There were lots of, well, I don't want to go into the details, but you needed very, very precise hand-to-eye coordination. And I had pretty good hand-to-eye coordination, boundless reserves of patience, and I didn't complain. So, of course, what ended up happening was that any time the UHF radio sets needed tuning, and they usually needed tuning every time we sailed, they just got me to tune the sets. They didn't bother training anybody else to do it because I was doing such a good job. So you're constantly walking a fine line between being indispensable and being so good at something that nobody else ever gets asked to do it. So if I learned one thing from being in the Navy, it would be that. Right? Never be the best person around at digging ditches, because all they do is give you a bigger shovel. Anyway, folks, that brings this episode of Mingles with Jingles to a conclusion. As always, if you've got any questions you'd like me to pretend to answer in the next video, post them in the comments to this one. And same time next week, all that remains is to say goodbye. And here is the mighty Jingles himself to do just that for us.
Goodbye.
See you next week, little fella, and see you guys too.
Mwah.